Order. I'd like to welcome everybody to the public evidence session for the Strategic Defence Review, and in particular, on behalf of the whole of the Defence Committee, a very, very warm welcome, Lord Robertson, to your good self as the lead reviewer, and also to General Sir Richard Barrons. I know that we're limited in time. We've only got an hour with your good selves, unless you wanted very, very briefly to make any introductory remarks, I'm going to ask members to begin their questions.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman, for the opportunity to come along. I'm sorry that Dr. Fiona Hill, the third reviewer,
yes,
is on the other side of the Atlantic, so she couldn't be here today. If I could say, just to start off with, this is not the first review that I've done. I did another one in 1998. At that time, 26 years ago, and that just seems like yesterday, we had 20,000 troops in Northern Ireland, either in Northern Ireland or preparing for Northern Ireland. NATO had just signed the NATO-Russia Founding Act, and we were in very good relations with President Yeltsin at the time. Russia was in the shadows, and we all thought that globalization was going to be a sort of major feature of our own prosperity. So that world has changed. We were spending at that point 2.7% of GNP on defence. I just wanted to make that point because it's worth remembering that fact. So the world has changed out of all recognition, and that is why the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary decided that they would have another review and that they would uniquely have an external review, and therefore asked me and General Barrons and Fiona Hill to conduct it with the department, not to the department, and we've got a very able secretariat working with us. Just briefly on the process, because I think it's quite important for people to know how we do it. So you have the three reviewers. Underneath us, we have a defence review team. As usual, as an acronym, the DRT6. So we have a technology expert, Grace Cassie. We have an industry expert, Robin Marshall, who is one of the non-executive directors on the Defence Board. Angus Lapsley, the NATO expert and Assistant Secretary General of the Alliance. Sir Jeremy Quinn is the acquisition expert, the former Conservative Minister for Defence Procurement, and your predecessor as Chairman of the Defence Select Committee. We have Ed Dinsmore on the people side of things, another expert in that area, and we have John Charles Gray from the Treasury. So we have a Treasury secondee on that. Underneath that is a secretariat where we've got about 20 people. We have a Home Office in bed, a Foreign Office in bed, and what else do we have embedded?
Cabinet Office.
The Cabinet Office, and we have a German officer and we have a French officer as part of the General Secretariat. We put out a number of propositions generally to the public, to institutions and to the department. We've got about 35 propositions we put out. Yeah. We received 14,500 expressions of interest.
14,500.
But 8,000 actual submissions. And in order that they could be processed, we were using an artificial intelligence method by which they can be sorted. Yes. But we the reviewers have seen quite a substantial number of individual submissions that have been put. All of the ones by the department, but other significant ones as well. And I highlight for the moment the Conservative Party did put a submission in, and it's one of the ones that the reviewers read as well. So we have 35 groups with each an individual chair, an expert in the field, and they have 4 or 5 other experts working with them, and they have gone through the challenge and review process, looking at the representations that have been made and adding their own values to it. And they have produced, each of them, for the 35 groups, I think it is, at the present moment, have produced an note, and the out notes then have been collated by us and will be reviewed, and we have an away 2 days at Ditchley Park next week where we're going to review the outcome of these reviews.
Good. Well, thank you very much for those introductory remarks, and no doubt members will want to question and delve into the detail about the form that the SDR is taking, as well as, in particular, AI. I know that's a matter
I hope, Chairman, you realise that, of course, we have not got to the stage of making recommendations yet, yes. And there is a bit of a limit in what we can actually say to the committee at the moment, but we're more than happy to come back once the report has been written and then give a full explanation of why we came to these conclusions.
Definitely. And I'm very, very grateful for that, Lord Robertson, post the publication. And in particular, I'm sure that after this public session, in our private session, there will be certain details that you may be able to inform the opinions of committee members. And I also want to put on record, Lord Robertson, to your good self, as well as to Sir Jeremy Quinn, for making the time to meet me, to talk me through just some of the aspects of the Strategic Defence Review, and for agreeing to be at today's evidence session. All right, with that, I'd like to now move on to Lincoln Jopp, please.
Lord Robertson, thank you very much indeed. You referenced the 98 Defence Review and the 2.7 of GDP which was being spent on defence at the time. That Defence Review, if memory serves, was very much touted as being foreign policy-led and threat-based. This time you have been tasked with a review which is deliverable and affordable within the resources available within the trajectory to 2.5. So my question is, doesn't this slightly put the cart before the horse, in as much as constraining your defence review to within a particular spending envelope, rather than taking a more purist approach, which might be required in the most dangerous situation that we found ourselves in since the Second World War?
I think the reality is that we all have to live within certain envelopes, and in 1998, inevitably, the same situation applies. So the terms of reference we have got were actually quite clear. I just read: the SDR will determine the roles, capabilities and reforms required by the UK Defence to meet the challenges, threats and opportunities for the 21st century, deliverable and affordable within the resources available to defence within the trajectory of 2.5%. The review will ensure that defence is central to both the security and the economic growth and prosperity of the UK. So, these were the terms of reference that we had, and that's what we're living with.
And so if actually your review came upon something where it said, well, what we really ought to be doing is this, but that's going to take us beyond the 2.5 envelope, are you going to note that and, as sort of a shopping list for the future?
It's a strategic defence review, so we're looking out to 2030, 2040 as well as that. So, there is a longer term trajectory, but we're living within the envelope that has been laid down for the terms of reference.
Okay. Thank you. Lord Robertson, in your introductory remarks, you also mentioned that there were 35 propositions. However, the committee in the original paperwork that we were sent advised that there were only 24. Has there been a change since the initial 24?
We split some of them up. I think they might have been too large in order to do it. So I think it's 35, isn't it? 35?
Yeah, so for example, originally space was included in the air proposition and we separated it out.
Okay.
We're treating intelligence differently. So there's been some steps taken along the way to break subjects out into their own arena.
Oh, thank you very much for that clarification, General. I'd like to now move on to Michelle, please.
Thank you.
Michelle Scroggle.
Thank you. This is obviously directed to both of you, but what learning has been done from the previous defence reviews about the cost to the strategic proposals that you'll be putting forward?
Well, we're pretty rigorous in costing all of what we're doing, both the legacy that we have inherited, because that is obviously the situation that we have to deal with. We have to deal with a legacy, we have to deal with new developments that have taken place that we've discovered are necessary, and we have to bear in mind what SACEUR is wanting from NATO. But at every stage, we do costings of any of the issues that come before us, and we're pretty rigorous in making sure that we know exactly what the costs are.
I'm particularly interested, obviously, post 2010. My constituency, Barrow-in-Furness, is still paying the price for that, and I think as a government and a country, we've paid a huge price on those decisions. So saving a few pounds this year, it's cost us an awful lot going forward. To what extent do you think you're having to make trade-offs, and will you be presenting a menu to government on where you think those trade-offs would be, or are you designing a concept that you would put forward?
Well, I had a long discussion with Mr. Liam Fox, who was the Defence Secretary who did the 2010 review. So we had an interesting exchange of views at that time. So we've learned a lesson from each of the Defence reviews going back through time, and hopefully, if there were mistakes made, we'll try and avoid them this time round. But I think you'll find that what we're doing is quite novel and interesting. We don't have to seek consensus. We make our views known to the Secretary of State. We have a weekly meeting with the Secretary of State. We've already met the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, and we'll meet them again in the process of doing it, in order to make sure that what we're doing is robust and will last the test of time. Richard, you want?
So I think we remind ourselves every morning that every review in my working life has failed generally within 2 years for a combination of two reasons. The first is they haven't predicted what's actually happened in the world. So the 97 review obviously didn't predict 9/11 and the many other examples. So our objective has to be as least wrong as possible in terms of how we design a formula for the future. And the second reason 2010 review is the most powerful example as they've failed is because they've left an enormous gap between ambition and resourcing, and a presumption that massive efficiencies would close that gap, and other things that would make the programme more difficult didn't happen, and they did happen, and the efficiencies didn't appear. So we're very mindful of that, and I think it's important to note this review is therefore different in a number of key respects. It's external, so there isn't a thrust of consensus, which is healthy. We are absolutely dealing with the transition to a new era. Everyone acknowledges this. It's a harder world, which will have to be treated from a defence perspective with a different formula from the formula that worked during the post-Cold War, which, as we now retrospectively understand it. And that treatment would include being really transformative, because we're in the digital age, so we're not about filling in holes that the armed forces may have had since the end of the Cold War. That would be the wrong thing to do. And this review is also profoundly different because it's looking across the entire defence enterprise. So we aren't just looking at the front end, we're looking at how the whole thing operates. And in there are ways of spending within the 2.5% limit money much better. So that's a constructive thought.
Thank you very much, General. Calvin Bailey, please.
Thank you. My questions all centre around your roles as external reviewers, and I suppose the government's aim in appointing you both is to inject objectivity and innovation into the process. But to prey on some of your remarks already made, you state that your involvement in defence seems like yesterday, and it wasn't for either of you. So one of the potential risks that therefore we could expose ourselves to is you bringing back past perceptions and biases into the process. But there's also a lot of potential benefits in bringing you both in, is that you'll be strong challenge advocates, being able to see the difference and disparity since the time that you've left. So my first question is, what do you see as the benefits and risks that external reviewers for the government defence policy can bring?
Well, I think the benefit is very clear, that we can look afresh at all of these issues without necessarily seeking a consensus either in the department or in the wider government. My experience the last time round, I had to execute the policy, so there was a lot of sort of trade-offs took place inside the department at that time. So we can look at it with a sort of clear eye. But we're not doing it alone. This is not three people, with our own particular opinions and biases. We've gone through this quite remarkable process of consultation. And it really is quite unprecedented, certainly much greater. We nearly 100 think tanks and academic institutions have contributed, over 200 from the defence supply chain and the wider industry, 30 nations from across the world have all made submissions in answer to some or other of the questions. The review and challenge groups have very thoroughly gone into it and have come out with their views. So at the end of the process, we'll have tested a lot of the opinions and the preconceived notions that many people will have. So it's pretty unprecedented to go through that kind of consultation, especially at speed. We've now finished all of the review and challenge groups, and a lot of the conclusions are really quite remarkable and far-sighted in what they're telling us.
Okay, then John
yes,
Barrons.
so I spent 40 years in the armed forces, retiring, and actually not retiring as a former chief. You don't ever really retire, but leaving and not getting paid. I noted that. And I've now been in the afterlife for 8 years, and I only do defence and security. That's my life. So I bring to the review as an external reviewer, that journey, particularly my tenure as the operations director and then Commander Joint Forces Command. And in the 2015 review, I launched Warfare in the Information Age, and you'll find echoes of that as they have developed in the Ministry of Defence since then. But in the 8 years, I've obviously looked at things through a much more commercial focus, worked with other governments, other institutions, and so I bring back to this a very different perspective. And because I have no career, I have no axe to grind, and I know where the skeletons might be, and I know how the services operate in the conditions of review, because that was me. So it'd be fair to say I like to think we can provoke a very challenging discussion where we're not looking for consensus. Okay. On risks, there are two, I think. Our job is to deliver the best review that we can, and we're well on course for that. And then we hand it on to the department to implement. So some in the department might think they can humour us and then go back to normal jogging. I see no sign of the government allowing that to happen, actually in all senior defence leadership. And the other risk is that we'll design a transformation agenda for other people to deliver, and they need to understand what we're saying. So the way in which politics, this committee in particular, as well as the senior defence leadership, pick up and run with the remaining 85% of this transformation is as important as the review we're doing.
Okay, and so
I've been in politics for 46 years, so I'm slightly ahead of General Barrons. And
I understand. we appreciate both of you for your service and particularly to the defence enterprise more broadly. But I also note some biases in your remarks already just about the failure of previous defence reviews, because one of the things I note is that there has been no defence review in either of your lifetimes that has ever actually gone about attempting to create growth within the defence enterprise, which is a challenge perhaps to leave you with. On to implementation then, the Australian Defence Strategic Review, which this process has been largely modelled on, had or created an implementation board, and this is something that you just mentioned a moment ago, General Barrons. One of the biggest challenges will be ensuring that this is implemented adequately once, and I'm assuming actually from your remarks that once you extricate yourselves from this, do you see a role in going forward with this, and what does implementation look like for you?
Having done one review before, I should have learned the lesson. But no, we're finishing the report. As we say, we're consulting along the line, so it won't come as a surprise at the end of the day. we hope that the government, the Prime Minister, will say yes, we like it, and we want to implement it. But that'll be up to the government to do that, and I think we want to get back to a normal sort of life again. But implementation will be extremely important, and it's very much in mind. We want to produce a report that is implementable and is implemented. So that's very much in our own mind, but it won't be for us to do it.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to move on to, if I may, AI and other matters. Ian Room, please.
Yeah. Thank you. Obviously, my questions around the governance and transparency of your work, and you've involved a number of experts in your review and challenge panels, as well as reportedly using AI to form the submissions to the SDR. How are you ensuring transparency and building public trust in relation to your approach?
Well, we've done a widespread consultation. We've gone to a whole series of groups ourselves, apart from harvesting the opinions from the wide range of organisations beforehand. And in the process of doing that, the review and challenge process, I think, is probably unrivaled. The number of people who are actually involved in that process is certainly unprecedented as well. So our work is highly transparent, as I say, partly our responsibility to Parliament, to this committee, as well as very, very high up on the agenda. So I think, in terms of consultation, I think it's pretty well unprecedented what we've been able to do in a very short period of time since the election.
Mm-hmm. And will the makeup of the review and challenge panels be made public?
At the end of the process, it certainly will be.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a process for identifying and resolving conflicts of interest? And are you comfortable with the robustness of that?
Absolutely, and both of us as reviewers have stood back from any involvement that we had that would have maybe compromised us. But all of the members who are involved in the process, the DRT6 and on the review and challenge panels, have all had to declare any declaration of interest.
Mm-hmm. Could you just explain a little bit more about how you've used AI?
Oh, AI is a tool. It's not intelligent. It's artificial intelligence is actually machine learning, and what we've done is to use a couple of these tools in order to sort through the 8,000 submissions that we had, in order to make sure that we see it. But it's simply a tool. It doesn't think for itself. It doesn't come to conclusions. It sorts out what would take us years to read if we were actually to read every single submission. But as I say, we've been very careful that we the reviewers have read all of the submissions made from inside the department itself, but we also read quite a substantial number of the individual representations that have been made.
Good, thank you very much. Fred Thomas, please.
Thank you, Chair. Lord Robertson, we hope that this SDR will leave this country in a better place in decades to come and better equipped. There's a war going on in Ukraine, and at some point, we hope the forces of democracy will force out Putin. And what will be left then is a large amount of learning about modern warfare. At the moment, some people say that the UK is not in a position that after that war in Ukraine finishes, we'll be able to make and have the intellectual right to make, produce, train with, and use at scale the autonomous and electronic warfare capabilities having success today in Ukraine. What practical steps are you currently considering to recommend so that changes?
Well, the military and the department are obviously watching very carefully and learning all of the time, and hopefully that learning experience being passed on to us will be something that will be eye-opening, I would have thought, for the future. But we have to deal with a lot of other things beyond it. Maybe in the private session we can talk more about the future threats. that we see. But clearly, Ukraine is a particular episode from which we can learn quite a substantial amount. But it's not the only event that we have to take account of in terms of the future. But Richard might have a view.
Yeah, it's a very important question. So, in my view, it would be completely wrong to think that the lessons that are coming from Ukraine in both how war is fought in the digital age within that particular construct and how industry responds are not being fully absorbed by the UK armed forces. And Secretary of State has announced Project Asgard in Estonia. There's a direct correlation in that. In the work of the review, it is absolutely taking note of what is being learned in Ukraine and what that might mean for the future of the UK armed forces, both in terms of the evolution of how you do armies, navies, air force and the enabling cast, and also the industrial relationship that is essential to supporting that.
Okay.
And so I think you'll be happy when the report comes out.
I hope so. Just to follow up on that, some defence commentators say that the types of organisation who are able to learn very quickly and iterate capabilities that are having effect successfully in Ukraine at the moment tend to be smaller or medium-sized businesses. Now, you'll have had hundreds, thousands of submissions from SMEs. How are you choosing which SMEs to meet with or which forums to meet them in? And are you connecting that to any activity in Ukraine?
We've had a lot of submissions have come in, both from the trade associations as well as from some of the big primes, and we've also had submissions from some of the smaller companies as well. And one of the key elements of this review is going to be how we deal with industry in the longer term. Clearly, we have learned, if we've learned anything substantial from Ukraine, it is that the supply of munitions, the supply of ammunition and the other supplies that our armed forces are very short of have got to become part and parcel of the military effort. So there will be a very considerable part of our report involved. So Jeremy Quinn, as I say, is a former Conservative Defence Minister. I'm absolutely intent, the three reviewers are, that this is not a Labour defence review. This is a United Kingdom defence review, and by choosing Jeremy Quinn, who was a very successful Minister for Defence Procurement and a Conservative, we were giving a very good signal, but we were also getting a very crucial resource to help us.
And can I just ask lastly, just about your sense and your feeling, having been Defence Secretary, taken further career, and now here you are doing outside of the government review. Do you think that we are positioned well in the UK to innovate quick enough to keep pace with what is happening in modern warfare in Ukraine?
Well, we certainly will be when this review is implemented.
Okay.
Derek Twigg, please.
Thanks, Chair. Can I ask how far you're examining policy in terms of global commitments and operations that we're involved with at the moment? The Secretary of State last week said there's around 10,000 personnel deployed in 50 geographical locations. What's your sort of remit in terms of policy and the global commitments we've already got and may have?
Well, I think the homeland has to be protected, but the armed forces that are designed for that can also be deployed elsewhere, and we're very conscious of the global responsibilities that the United Kingdom has, and the terms of reference that we have also make it clear that the SDR will identify, this is the terms of reference, will identify ways to maintain the UK's defence ties to the Indo-Pacific region, the Gulf and the Middle East. The UK is committed to the delivery of the AUKUS partnership with the US and Australia. So in terms of what we recommend, we have to bear that in mind.
So you are then looking at whether, for instance, we have too many commitments given the envelope we're working in, or whether we should sort of focus more narrowly on where our armed forces should be involved.
Well, as I say at the beginning, we have to deal with the legacy. We have to deal with the new elements that are now making themselves apparent that we don't have, and we also have to deal with what SACEUR wants to do, but we must be conscious also of the wider responsibilities that this country.
I understand you're conscious, but I'm being specific about my question is whether you've been asked specifically to examine whether we are too thinly spread and whether we should be actually more focused.
Well, that's one of the questions that we have to answer.
Yeah, so that's something you actually are looking at, and that will be part of your recommendations to the Secretary of State and the MOD.
Well, we clearly have to.
Yeah, and how far down the road are you with that at the moment?
Well, we've only finished the review and challenge process, so we haven't yet got to the stage of making recommendations.
But you suspect that will be a significant part of your recommendations at the end of the report?
Well, it's part of our consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, with that in mind, are you also considering the implications for logistics, sustainment and personnel? And if so, how are you testing the resilience of those options?
We are. General Barrons?
So it's a very important aspect of acknowledging that we have moved into this new era of potentially existential risk, where deterrence rests on credible warfighting capabilities. So, from the perspective of working out what to do best for the armed forces, you cannot construct a credible option just about the shop window of equipment and the people in them. We have to be absolutely clear we're constructing options which have enough ammunition, spare parts, training, medical capability so that they are able to actually fight, because that's the basis on which deterrence functions. And so this is a really important part of how the review frames options, and it also relates directly to the changes we may recommend in how the Defence Enabling Act, so logistics, infrastructure, functions. It has to support credible deterrence in a resilient and an enduring way, and it plays absolutely to the question asked about innovation, because it's common to all outcomes.
So we just take one of those, say logistics. You're part of this process. You will be testing the resilience of being able to basically deliver the logistics for whatever armed forces we should want in the future. That's what you're saying.
It's a profoundly important aspect of the.
So that will be definitely a part of your whole process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Emily Buckle, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Morning both. As you know, the Defence Sec's recently announced defence reforms, capability cuts, and the Permanent Sec announced job cuts as well to the MOD when he was last before this committee. So how have these impacted on the review, and are you worried that future announcements might prejudge your findings?
The Defence Secretary and the Ministers are keeping us informed all the time of what they're doing, and they're trying not to make decisions that would preempt the outcome of the review, but they've got to continue to run the department as it stands at the moment. This is a strategic defence review, so we are looking forward, but at the same time, you know, the ministers are determined that they won't preempt our conclusions by taking decisions. But in the meantime, they've got to take decisions about equipment that isn't necessary, that is redundant, that is more expensive to maintain than it is to prolong, and we expect that to take place. But all along, they keep us well informed.
Could your findings be at odds with some of the changes that they're making? Could you say we disagree with that in the outcome of your review?
Well, we disagree. If we were to disagree, and we haven't, then we would disagree before they took the decision. And they're very conscious here. As I say, we're doing it with the department, with the Ministry of Defence, and not to it. So although we're independent reviewers, at the same time, you know, we're perfectly conscious of what ministers have as responsibilities.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Alex Baker, please.
Thank you very much. So every new government loves a review, and it would appear this government is no exception. So, I mean, obviously at the moment we've got the AUKUS review going on, the resilience review, the China audit, the global impact review, the economic diplomacy review. I mean, just to name just a few. How do your team go about actually engaging with all these other reviews going on in government and try and align with them?
Well, I think we'd like to think that we were the most important of the reviews, but maybe that's just an illusion. But you ask a very good question, because these things are going on. But the ones that relate to defence, are doing it in tandem with us. For example, Mr. Lovegrove is doing the AUKUS review, so he's working very closely with us as he goes along. So the security review, the China review, we would see their conclusions and we'll take them into account.
Okay, so obviously, you will know my constituency. We have a strong defence industrial base in my constituency, and from speaking to the companies that are there, actually they are seeing that obviously alongside the SDR, we've got obviously the DBT's industrial strategy, where defence is listed. We've then got the defence industrial strategy, and I think their feedback is there are a lot of strategies, and how is this all going to join up?
Well, that's a question for government. It's a good question, but I can assure you that the government is well aware of the reviews are being done for a purpose, because after 14 years, there needs to be a fundamental look at all of these issues. But they all blend together. And the Cabinet Office and the Cabinet Secretary in particular, has the job of making sure that there is a degree of compatibility with all of the reviews.
So once you've got the recommendations for the SDR, if there is a substantial change in that, will that then will the government commit to changing, for example, the defence industrial strategy or the DBT's industrial strategy to sort of fit in line with that?
Well, thankfully, I am not in the government.
Yeah.
And that will be a matter for the government. We've been chosen because we're not in the government, and we can look with fresh eyes at these issues. So I'm relieved of the responsibility that I once had, but it will be for the government to do the implementation.
Will that be your recommendation that government needs to basically make those changes?
Well, we'll take account of the reviews that relate specifically to defence. And the terms of reference were actually quite clear at the beginning, that the review, other areas of national security policy are outside the scope of this review. So we're focusing largely on defence and the issues that relate to defence, and we'll make our recommendations in the light of that. But we're conscious that other reviews are taking place, and we'll take them into account.
Okay, and so do you think that I can go back to the companies in my constituency and be able to say to them that there is a commitment to have a clear strategy, so they will be really clear how they can operate and do business, and meet the needs of our defence needs?
Yeah, I think once the report comes out, I think you should send them all a copy of it, and I think they'll see very clearly the direction of travel and the way in which we've built industry into the way in which security policy is determined. And that's why Sir Jeremy Quinn is there, and he's been doing a lot of consultations as part of his job on the Defence Review team in order to bring in smaller companies as well as the big ones into the general debate.
Thank you very much. Mike Martin, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if you might be able to tell us a little bit more about what you understand by NATO first, and within that, whether you're looking at maybe fleshing out some options depending on whether the stance of the United States with respect to NATO shifts as we go into the new year.
Well, I used to be in charge of NATO, so I think I've got an appreciation of both the strengths and the weaknesses of the alliance. But we've been out to shape the Supreme Headquarters in Mons, and we've spoken to the people there. We've also spoken to Sakir himself in relation to what he wants of this country. The whole military posture of NATO has changed given the current prevailing situation in the world. And I think we're perfectly conscious now of what is desired and what is wanted of this country. NATO first doesn't mean NATO alone, because we've got broader responsibilities than that. But I think it is perfectly clear what NATO needs and the alliance needs for the future, and we fit into that. Maybe General Barrons.
Sorry, if I may, just specifically on the question of a potential change in the United States' posture going into the new year. Would that influence the outcome of the review at all?
Well, we'll see what happens. We're watching carefully, as everybody else is, what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic. There's a change of government coming in the 20th of January, but I don't think in relation to, personally, I don't think in relation to NATO that much is going to change. They will remain a very substantial part of the NATO alliance and will continue. But the Europeans, as I used to say when I was in charge, and it's as true now as it was then, the Europeans need to do more inside NATO in order to carry more of the burden presently carried at the moment by the United States.
I think that's absolutely right. I think we'd all agree with that, and of course the UK has a role to play in that as well. I mean, do you think that the UK and NATO could deliver its mission in the Euro-Atlantic area without the support of the United States?
Well, I think that's a hypothetical. I don't think it's going to happen. Under the first Trump administration, they reinforced their support for NATO. They gave weapons to the Ukrainians. And defence expenditure was increased, and so was the contribution to NATO itself. So, we'll need to wait and see, but that's a hypothetical issue that will only become relevant when we see what happens.
Okay. And then just one final question, if I may. As you go through this process, and I know you're not quite there yet, but as sort of draft conclusions come out and as they firm up, one of the things this defence review will do is send signals to our allies and to our adversaries. To what degree are we road testing those with not just NATO allies, also the incoming Trump administration and also Russia and China? To what degree do we think that, or to what degree do we understand how this review will be received around the world?
Well, we're in constant contact, and we've actually got an American officer as part of the Secretariat, so that we're making sure that allies and partners are involved. We had a big review and challenge panel at Wilton Park last week, discussing specifically allies and partners, and with a lot of the people engaged. So yes, we will, and as the recommendations firm up, then we will obviously be involving other people in that. You want to say something?
I'm sure we're going to surprise as something only best inflicted on your opponents, not on your own side. So as the review matures, and it's not at that point yet, there will come a period where the emerging conclusions have to be socialised across Whitehall and with key allies. And then in the announcement of the review and indeed its implementation, clearly that is sending a message to our potential opponents about where UK defence is going as part of collective security in the world in which we live in. So it'll probably happen in that order.
Thank you. I think I had a strap line the other day about sort of intimidating our enemies, inspiring our friends. That's what I hope the review will do.
And would you commit to share that review with this committee at the same time that you share it with allies and partners?
Well, we're already committed to the chair that we'll certainly come back. Once we've got a clearer view about where we're going, we'll certainly come back.
Thank you very much for that undertaking. And Lord Robertson, just to press you further on this particular issue, now Nick Whitney, the former head of the European Defence Agency, he stated that the work of the SDR, your work, will be complicated by what is happening around the world, and the decisions will therefore be contingent on what's going on, not just in the US, but also in France, Germany, and elsewhere. How concerned are you that your work may be unravelled by some of the political scenarios that may play out at the beginning of next year?
Well, we're trying to map a way forward, you know, not just for 5 years, but 10 years, so up to 2040. So there's no reason why, you know, events that take place in the future won't completely destroy what we're doing. But, you know, you can't predict what's going to happen in the future. You know, that when I did the review in 1998, we could not have contemplated the changes that were going to take place in the world. As I said at the beginning, it looked fairly benign and globalization was going to produce great results. But we are where we are today. So we have to deal with today, but try to look forward as well to developments that are taking place, both, you know, militarily, but also politically as well.
Thank you. I'm glad that you're alive to that. Fred Thomas, please. Do you want to comment on this particular point?
It wasn't on this particular point, Chair, but it was to get back to a question around the overall strategy and what we can expect to see from the SDR. Will you be getting into as much detail as to recommend particular centres of excellence or clusters? For example, around marine autonomy. Will you be suggesting, for example... I can imagine
why you're asking that question. Yeah.
No, I've got no link to it whatsoever.
No self-interest.
No, in the interest of full discretion, I represent Plymouth, where would be a very potential place for a centre for marine autonomy development. The reason I'm asking is we need to innovate quicker. And are you going to be in the SDR recommending how we do that practically, as opposed to just strategically saying we need to innovate quicker?
So you're absolutely right that at the heart of transforming armed forces for warfare in the 21st century, you are going to embrace really two major themes. One is foundational data, so cloud operated by AI, networks and synthetic environments into which you plug capability. And the other is, and it's already started, the evolution of armies, navies and air forces into a crewed, uncrewed and autonomous mix with autonomous capability predominating as time passes, and that mostly relies on the progression of AI and the trust in it. So our review is absolutely going to chart that path with at least a 20-year horizon. It will alight on the first steps because they're essentially already underway. It will illuminate there's an enormous opportunity for the UK to set the pace globally in how you do some of those things. But at the level of specific acts, I think that will be mostly a matter for the department and implementation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Obviously, we've had a good canter through various aspects of the SDR, but before we move into our private session, are there any other things that you would like to place on record, Lord Robertson, with regards to some of the submissions that you have received, certain things that you'd like to say in public which we haven't covered thus far?
I don't think so. I think we've covered most of the ground. The territory on which the submissions have come in is very, very broad indeed, and the process of review and challenge has been pretty demanding of the panels themselves. They've looked at them, they've scrubbed them, they've come back with a lot of views and conclusions from that, and we'll now collate them. And get a series of recommendations and eventually give a draft report to the Secretary of State.
And just for the record, are there any areas in which you found that there was a shortage of evidence or certain submissions which actually changed the direction of travel in terms of your thinking?
8,000 submissions. I don't think there was any stone left unturned in that process. But you know, we have our own thoughts, and we've developed them as we've gone along.
I just got some brief further points. Firstly, from Mike Martin.
I was really struck by your comments earlier that defence reviews tend to come unstuck for one of two reasons: either the world changes or ambition and resources aren't matched. There's obviously very little we can do about the former because it's impossible to predict the future, but can you categorically guarantee that this review will match ambition and resources? We hope so. We can only say to the government
what 2.5% of GDP can produce.
Absolutely, it's down to the government, but in the actual review document, that will be fully costed and that ambition will match that resource. Obviously, it's out of your hands how the government chooses to implement that. But in terms of the bit that you are responsible for, can you guarantee that ambition and resources will be matched?
We can't guarantee anything, and it preempts what we're doing. And it's a hypothetical situation. We're operating within an envelope that the government have laid down, and we'll try to plot a trajectory, well beyond the immediate period, and then we'll present that to the government. But the terms of reference are very specific that we have to make our recommendations within 2.5% of GNP, which I remind the committee is actually well above the NATO average, which is and the NATO objective, which is 2%. So the 2.5% is above that, although the OBR report actually projects 2.3, and for the 5 years of the Parliament.
So it does imply, if I may just push you gently on this, that if we are setting it to a 2.5 envelope, that does imply that you're going to be arguing in the report for a reduction of our ambitions.
Why would we reducing?
Because defence is not currently fully funded. There's a 17 billion hole in the equipment programme, for instance.
We're operating on the basis of the terms of reference that we were given, and we'll make our recommendations based on that.
And I was very struck by General Barrons' statement that we're not going to fill in holes defence left in some cases since the Cold War. So that would suggest that it's not a question of using the 2.5 to backfill those holes in the current EP, for example, and that some things will be left.
Well, I don't necessarily need to speak for General Barrons, who can speak for himself, but what we're doing, but by looking at every aspect of the defence enterprise, there are areas where we can see things can be done better and things can be done cheaper. So some of the potholes can be filled in as part of that process. But I think people outside underestimate the way in which we are looking at every aspect of defence. With a laser-like approach to seeing what is being done, why is it being done, and can it be done better? And at the end of the day, as General Barrons has said, we hope we will produce a model that other people will admire and maybe even copy.
And just a couple more brief supplementaries from Fred Thomas and Calvin Belly. Fred Thomas, please.
Thank you. Lord Robertson, you said just then you're looking at every aspect of defence. And yesterday we had a statement of intent around the defence industrial strategy, which is from the MOD rather than from yourselves. Can I ask about skills? And as part of every aspect of defence, are you finding that we've got a severe shortage of skills, or is it a kind of red flag area that impacts our ability to carry out the strategic things that you are looking at, or is it somewhere else? Are we in fact in a good place on skills?
No, there's a skills crisis. It's not unique to defence. The review is examining that and will make some very powerful recommendations, I'm pretty confident, on the way to fix it. And that is as important as deciding on how much ammunition to buy.
And the skills crisis you allude to, General, that's to do with tech, the ability to move forward, or is it to do with more traditional skills, building things made of steel?
So they're slightly different problems. So the one that's most prominent for defence is accessing the skills in the digital space. So cyber, information operations, artificial intelligence, those kinds of things, where the technology is led in the civil sector, but you have to apply it in the military, and we have to find a better way of doing that, and that's fine. The second aspect is more about the industrial base, where in order to deter, you have to have homeland resilience, and part of that is industrial resilience, and some of that is about sovereign supply, and some of that is about having a national skills base that allows you to innovate and endure in an environment of confrontation and conflict. In the defence space, we are interested in that. There's no point having powerful armed forces and a fragile defence industry. They have to be seen as symbiotic. And it's only Defence's job to fix some of that. And then there are other aspects which are a wider society issue. And one of the things that underpins this review is we're having to reflect that we've transitioned from an era which I served in, where war was essentially outsourced to the regular armed forces and didn't really trouble civil society. Now we're in an era where clearly war has returned as a whole of society endeavour. Our review is only about the defence bit of that, and there are many other dependencies which are for others to fix.
Thank you very much. Calvin Bailey.
Thank you. Sorry, just to pray on your comments again before I finish my questioning from earlier. The comments that you raised on AI sound like, very much like the prophecy of Sands in his review and missiles and unmanned flight. So that's just a point to note. And the stones unturned, you spoke about medical. I would ask whether you've received a input from the NHS about our ability to absorb large casualty numbers within Europe and our commitment to a European problem. And then, to finish my question, bearing in mind that we, as a democratically elected body, struggle to hold defence to account and to understand the progress of anything that's already underway and published and bought into by the department, as Derek alluded to earlier, what are your hopes of doing so?
I think we can bring fresh eyes to some of the problems that exist. But having been involved, as Secretary of State and then as Secretary General of NATO, I've kept a deep knowledge and a deep interest, curiosity about defence. So I'm learning some new things by being in the review and in the department and having access to any of the information that we can't require. I'm not sure that a lot of it was hidden before. A lot of it is there and open and easily available to the public. I just wish sometimes that people were as worried as I am on behalf of my children and my grandchildren when I know what's going on. But I think that we're all in possession of that information, and I don't see, despite heavy classification of a lot of material, that actually that anything material is being hidden from us, from Parliament, or from the general public as a whole. But I hope that there could be a wider appreciation of what the military do, what it needs to do, and what the country has to do at this time.
Thank you. Lord Robertson, General Sir Richard Barrons, it's been a pleasure, and thank you very much for giving evidence to the Defence Committee. I'm sure that everybody within the wider defence community will have gained great benefit from that. I'm also grateful to the members for keeping their contributions very concise so that we have finished within the hour. And with that, I'd like to bring the public evidence session on the Strategic Defence Review to a close. Order.